Hey YouTube, welcome back to Griffin Grills. It's been a while since we've come to the channel, but it's a new year and hopefully we'll have a more consistent schedule of updating videos and getting them up for you to enjoy. So if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so you get alerts every time that I update a video. Today we're going to be covering our holiday rib roast. We're doing a prime rib roast. We're going to show you how to trim it down, French the roast, which basically means exposing the bones, and then we're also going to truss it up with some butcher's twine so that it holds a consistent shape while we're actually smoking it and gives it a more even surface while it's smoking. So without further ado, let's get down to the table and see what we have to work with. Alright, so here's our rib roast, and it's called a prime rib, but that doesn't always mean you'll get a prime cut. Sometimes it'll be select. About 55% of cuts are select, only 3% of cuts are actually prime. But what you want to look for is make sure you got a good marbling. Don't know if it shows up on camera that well, but you see all these little specks of white in the meat. That's actually marbling. That's going to be intermuscular fat, which is going to break down over time and create a better flavor. So we're just going to French it out today. Mainly what that means is exposing the bone. This roast does have bones running in it. We want to make sure we remove this large chunk of hard fat here. That's not going to render down, and it's going to prevent our seasoning from getting to the meat. We'll take a look at the fat cap on the top. Trim off a little bit of that, make sure we get rid of all the silver skin. We want our rub to penetrate this meat as best it can, and it's going to have a much better chance of doing that if we remove most of the fat cap. So once we get that off, we're going to season it first with some coarse salt. In this case, I've got coarse kosher salt, and that's going to help to seal in some of the flavor of the meat and just make it an overall better product. We'll finish it off with some Montreal steak before we put it on the smoker. We've also got some butcher's twine here that we're going to tie around it to kind of keep that round shape so we get a more even cooking throughout the process. And then after we get it seasoned up with a little salt, mainly a salt brine to help kind of elevate the flavor, we'll wrap it up in the plastic and keep everything ready to go. So I've got my plastic wrap ready. I've got a good sharp knife, and this has been in the refrigerator for a couple of days, so that fat should be harder and it's a lot easier to trim if that fat's nice and cool. You can stick it in the freezer for an hour or so. That also helps to trim off some of the hard fat, and it's much safer to do it when the meat is colder. That's why they recommend freezing it. That way you can actually trim the meat and not risk a slip injury and have the knife cut you in the process. So we'll go ahead and get it out of the package and start trimming it up. And Frenching basically is just exposing these bones on the side. It's going to give it a better overall presentation, and it just kind of looks cool. So let me get it out of the package and on the board, and we'll start the trim. Alright, we're going to start the Frenching process by removing basically this hard layer of fat that's going to prevent us from getting to the actual meat. Plus we want to remove most of this section so we can expose the bones and have a better presentation. So mainly all I'm looking for is this section right here. Like I said, we have butcher's twine that we're going to tie that together so it'll tighten it up and help give it a better even cooking. And then once you get the roast cooked, you just remove the strings and then you can do even slices throughout. So we'll start right here with working on this fat that we want to take out, that big clump. You just want to make shallow cuts. Helps to have a good sharp knife. And since I'm going for the bone, I'm going to go pretty deep in this just to make sure I get all the way down to those bones. You can kind of rock your knife back and forth on the bones. So you do have a little bit of meat in there, but the loss compared to the whole roast, it actually benefits you to remove that because this hard fat is not going to render down, and you really don't want to be eating this. You can, however, save it to grind up in hamburgers. It does do great in that. If you got leaner meat, you can grind this up with it and it adds a little bit more flavor to your hamburger. Basically, when I'm carving that down, I just want that knife to ride light along the side of the bone. Using that as basically my trace line to follow to get to my actual roast. And I'm actually scoring this right along where that fat line runs throughout. You can see where that fat line comes through. I'm just scoring that off. You will lose a little bit of the meat in the process, but the overall effect in the cook is actually going to benefit it to remove some of that. Just work your knife through. A good boning knife usually works pretty well. All I have is this chef's knife, but I've used this one so many times that I can about do what I need to with it. Just helps if you have a boning knife to get in between those bones. Now some of this fat you can actually pull off by hand, especially when you get to the fat cap, the top piece of the meat. You'll actually be able to pull a little bit of that off by hand. See right here, I'm kind of removing some of that. Once it starts getting a little tough, that's when you can come in with your knife and just start making some shallow cuts, working your way down, trying to remove all that fat and silver skin. And if you do see a little bit of meat, like I got some exposed meat right there where I might have made a cut a little too deep, you can always back up and bring your knife out. Just work your way down until you're back into solid fat. Alright, so you hear people talk about silver skin a lot in your meat, and if you're not familiar with what that is, you can kind of see it when you're carving up with this little glistening strip running through there. That is actually silver skin. That will actually work as a barrier to penetrate, to keep you from penetrating your seasoning into the meat rather. So you want to make sure you remove all that. Sometimes you can just pull it off. Sometimes it just takes a little knife work. Just get underneath it a little bit, pull it back, and then just use your knife to follow down through it. It's not always that thick, and here's a good example. You can see where I've got that shiny silver skin right here, but when I flip the strip over, you can see a little meat underneath it. So that's what you want to kind of remove from your roast or your briskets, pork butts. A lot of those have the silver skin that's not going to allow that seasoning to penetrate, so you want to make sure you remove that off. Alright, that looks pretty good right there. I've got a nice symmetrical circle for my roast. The bones, you can leave those on and you can get as fancy with the trim as you want. Typically a French trim would be complete bone exposure. If you leave a little meat on there, it's not really going to affect anything. But if you want to make it look a lot more cleaner for your holiday presentation, you can certainly spend as much time as you want trimming that off. I'm going to work on this a little bit, and when I come back, we'll be actually salting this up, wrapping it in our plastic wrap. That way we can let that sit in the fridge. Typically you want to do a salt brine for 24 hours. I'm not going to have quite that much time today, so I'm going to go a little lighter on my salt than you typically would. When I apply my rub, it doesn't have a whole lot of salt in it, so the only salt I'm going to get in the seasoning process is going to be from this brine. So when we come back, I'll have this completely finished up and be ready to wrap it in our plastic wrap, but we are going to tie it up with the butcher's twine before we do the wrap and the salt brine. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Alright, now that I've got this trimmed up to my liking, we're going to actually truss it with some butcher's twine and season it with our salt. And you basically just want to cut you a piece of butcher's twine for every bone in your roast. Since I have two, I'm going to do 2 strings. And we're basically going to run one right between the 2 bones and one on the end to keep this end from flaring out when it starts to cook. So what I like to do is set my strings kind of where they're going to go. So this one's going to be all the way out on the end. And then this one will be right between the 2 bones. You'll have a long side and a short side. And give it a couple of little twists before you tie it off, and that'll actually help to hold it together. Also, I didn't really trim much on the back where the bones actually run in, because I'm not probably going to serve this back portion anyways. I'm just going to follow my knife right along the edge of the bones and cut these off. And one string running right between the bones. And we got another string that's going to come along this outside edge and just kind of hold this end together so it doesn't fan out when we start cooking. And what I meant by giving it a couple of little twists, this string here, we're going to go underneath and underneath about 2 or 3 times just to make sure we get a good solid hold. And you just want to tighten that up where you get a nice round shape. And this will actually hold your knot in place while you go to tie your other end. And that just helps to give it a nice appearance when you go out there to start grilling. Alright, so here we are back with our rib roast, and we've got it trussed off, tied up real tight. That way it gets a nice symmetrical shape to help us in the cooking process. So we're just going to season it up with a little kosher salt right now. You don't want to go super heavy, but just a light dusting to help kind of work on that meat. Even though we're not going to eat the backside here, I'm just going to throw a little on there for good measure. Make sure we get both sides. Alright, so I'm going to wrap this up in some plastic. I hate to do this to everybody, but we're going to make this a 2-part video. So come back with us next time and we'll season it up with some Montreal steak seasoning. I'll show you how I'm going to set the Weber Smoky Mountain up to smoke this bad boy, and hopefully we'll have some good eats. So we'll see you in the next video. Alright, we're back up. Now, we saw how we trimmed down that rib roast. We're going to get that butcher's twine around it. That's going to give it an even, shape while it's smoking. Help that seasoning get in there and penetrate it. The second part of our video is actually going to be the one where we smoke the roast on the Weber Smoky Mountain. And then we'll finish it off with a reverse sear on the Weber Performer with the slow and sear. So stay tuned for that part. Like I said, if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Leave me some comments, tell me what you think, and if you don't mind sharing this video with your friends and on Facebook and other social media, I would appreciate it because it does help the channel out. So we'll see you in the next part, and I'll actually have it smoked, plated up, and go through all the steps with you on that one. Thanks!